Hey everybody, it's the Mad Matster. This is my second attempt at doing this video. It's an off-the-cuff sort of video explanation, maybe a multi-part video explanation of my political beliefs and how they've evolved. And I feel like I have to do this to kind of impart what I have learned and what I believe and how it's evolved through the years. Certain people, I have discussions with or arguments with may not understand where I'm coming from. I always try to understand where other people are coming from, so I am just projecting that upon myself to do these videos. So, where do I begin? Well, I grew up in a pretty liberal household. I would say it was pretty much a mainstream Democrat, but with a little bit more, let's just say, a little bit more leftist ideas there. I had a few family members that were even full-on socialists, and probably a few that were sort of in an anarchist tradition, loosely based. And some, the hippie generation, boomers that were, still believed in a lot of the ideas that they did. Some of them strayed quite a bit from those ideas and are hypocrites about it, but nevertheless, that is what happens to people a lot of the time. So, one of the things I remember is the first Persian Gulf War and how there was kind of a consensus on the left that it was a war for oil or for, dubious reasons compared to, say, World War II or whatever. And I was kind of brought up to believe that that was bad. I was, shown what was going on and what, I was told by family friends or family themselves, that was something that people in power were trying to hold on to their power and, try to push their thing with war or whatever. So there was a lot of money to be made by war. So I was kind of taught that from an early age. Now, I was pretty much, I wouldn't say politically neutral, but I listened to a lot of music that had a left-wing message. And it really wasn't on purpose, because it's just a lot of the bands at the time would talk about stuff like that. A lot of thrash bands and punk bands, crossover bands, DRI, Suicidal Tendencies, Napalm Death, bands like that. I mean, they had a lot of those messages in their music. So that was kind of where I came from as far as everything goes. Now, the second big event that happened was in my political evolution, if you will. I voted for Bill Clinton in 1996, so I was just like, well, yeah, even by then, I should say that I'm kind of digressing here. That was the first election I voted in, so it probably gives my age away, but whatever. I mean, a zennial or whatever the fuck they call it, exennial, I don't know. So even by then, it was acknowledged by a lot of people that Bill Clinton was not really a great person or a great not great politician. He was for the time, he was a great politician as far as skill being a politician. It was acknowledged that he wasn't really what people were hoping for or looking for as far as the left goes. So I voted for him. It was kind of lesser of two evils. He had, I think it was Bob Dole at the time. And Bob Dole, just represented the past and like conservatism and Christianity and, holding on to all that shit. I mean, now he might be a conservative Democrat, considering how fucking the Overton window has been pushed to the right. However, back then, it was a choice. He was unlikable. And Bill Clinton, to be fair, even if it was on a more right-wing point of view as far as economics go, he did kind of hold the country together. I mean, some of that wasn't really his deal. Technology was exploding. You know, it was, a lot of stuff was going on, and a lot of different things. So, I mean, I'll get to that later. He planted the seeds for a lot of the bad shit that came later, unfortunately. But that was my first election. But around 1998, 99, my friend read a book by Noam Chomsky. And I don't know which one of us started reading those his books, but it's kind of hard to say how that evolved. But nevertheless, I kind of bought into it. I was like, well, America's kind of an imperialist power, and it's kind of hypocritical to go around saying that we want human rights and freedom when that's not really what it's all about. And I've always been, this is another thing about me, I hated fakery and hypocrisy of it. And I still do, of anybody. I hate how people come out and say they're this thing, but they're the other thing. Just anything fake, anything puts on a front to such an extent that it's just ridiculous if you really know what it's all about. So reading Noam Chomsky kind of unveiled this idea that I'd already been exposed to with, family, friends and stuff, from the past, that America wasn't really doing things for the people of humanity. So that kind of exploded, and I started to see things a little bit differently, and that caused a lot of conflict between people that were into the mainstream Democrat thing. And I was like, well, no, Bill Clinton is not the greatest choice, and neither is Al Gore. So I voted for Ralph Nader in the 2000 election. Of course, I got the brunt of the blame for George W. Bush becoming elected. But as prescient as that seems, it's kind of seemed to happen a second time, of course. And you can argue that Ralph Nader was a spoiler or whatever, but really, was he really a spoiler, or was Al Gore just not likable enough? Third parties are always around. It's just, And the other thing that happened around that time was the WTO protests, which, ironically, I think, in a certain way, because of some of the more right-wing people that were involved with that, even if it was mostly a leftist movement, that kind of led to Donald Trump in some ways. Some of those leftover grievances from those protests and the whole movement. But I'll get to that later, of course. So I kind of continued that course for a while, and then 9/11 happened, and I had really been kind of drinking the Kool-Aid of the Noam Chomsky, anti-military industrial complex left. I wouldn't say Kool-Aid. I was drinking that tea. I'm not going to call it Kool-Aid because I still believe in it pretty much. A lot of that pretty much, which, unlike a lot of people, I've kind of kept my beliefs more consistent than I even realized once I started thinking about doing this video. So 9/11 happened. I was kind of like, well, it was bound to happen sooner or later because of America's involvement with all this shit overseas. And I probably was a little callous at first about it in a way, which is pretty smug and arrogant, and kind of, frankly, I was kind of an asshole. So looking back, I kind of regret that. But then the 9/11 truth movement started to happen. And then that's kind of when things started to go off the rails for me. Now, off the rails probably to other people. I do believe that America or there were people in America that covered up for what the Saudis may know who did, what was going on. We covered for other countries, complicity in the whole thing. But the 9/11 thing really caught wind, once George W. Bush was reelected, and I was totally swept into that. I read a lot of articles and stuff like that, and I was really sold. Now, I never believed the crazier conspiracies. I mean, the crazier conspiracy theories about 9/11, but I definitely believed that the Bush administration, on some level, were involved at least in covering it up, or everything. I still somewhat believe in that. I don't think anybody gave the order per se. I think it's more they let it happen on purpose because it's a very complex geopolitical situation. They had, I almost think they were forced to, this is part of what I believe, but this is my new theory about it before I get off the track too much. But I basically believe it's like America may have been, or the American government may have been forced into accepting it happening because they wanted to retain relations with the Saudis, or there's all this stuff, all these complicated situations. This is my current theory, so to speak, about 9/11, but that's for another time. Anyways, so what had happened with the 9/11 truth stuff is going back. Actually, I'm kind of backtracking a little bit on this as far as the time frame goes. But when JFK came out by Oliver Stone, I was totally convinced of it. I bought On the Trail of the Assassins by Jim Garrison. I was totally caught into the JFK conspiracy theory. So the 9/11 conspiracy theory didn't really seem too far-fetched in comparison. Really is not. If you believe in the 9/11 conspiracy theory, you probably believe in the JFK conspiracy theory. Now, another thing that did happen that I forgot to mention, and I don't know why I forgot this, but as I'm doing this video, I'm remembering more stuff. There was also a very important book, and it wasn't Noam Chomsky. It was in the late 90s. It was Jesse Ventura's I Ain't Got Time to Bleed. Now, this was a very influential book on me because I was, up until that point, I was totally caught into like this Democrat versus Republican thing. And it was like, oh yeah, the Republicans are evil. Democrats are the best, man, So once I read that book, I kind of started to have a little bit more of an independent course. And I should note, I still really wholly respect Jesse Ventura, and his evolution politically is really interesting because he started out pretty much kind of a right-winger, and then he went to libertarian, and he went to sort of populist center-right, or maybe center-left in a certain way. Now he's kind of on the left, but it is what it is, and people criticize him for it, but this is the evolution that he had. And he educated himself, and he talked to many people, and I really admire him for kind of evolving and just trying to be open to things and trying to challenge his own viewpoints. And people call him, people can criticize him for all the conspiracy stuff, but at the end of the day, I don't know. I just think he's a fascinating character. He's still one of my favorite people politically now. But on that note, I'll continue with the time frame. So it was, I voted. So in 2004, I voted for John Kerry, and I really didn't like him that much. I just knew it was kind of a lesser of two evils at that point, because George W. Bush, even a lot of Republicans will acknowledge this now, he ruined so much around the world with Iraq and just various things like that. So voting for John Kerry it was a protest against George W. Bush and all of his thing. Now, you can see that some of the Democrats are sort of playing some revisionist history with Bush because of Trump, which is completely fucking ridiculous, and it makes me mad. It makes me mad more than I can even imagine. Seeing Michelle Obama cavorting around with George W. Bush in pictures and stuff, it's just pathetic. But anyways, let's continue on. So the next thing that happened is I started listening to Air America. I was totally into that left-wing channel and everything, and I listened to like Sam Cedar and Mike Malloy and Randy Rhoads and all those people. I was totally into that, that whole thing. As the 9/11 thing, as I did more and more research, just basically just reading articles and stuff, reading conspiracy theories, I discovered someone named Alex Jones. And that was interesting because I don't know if I had heard of him before, but I was pretty fascinated by a lot of the stuff he had to say. And at that time, he was fully against both parties, the establishment, George W. Bush in particular, and he was totally even on board with some left-wing people being on his show a lot of the time. Like, remember, like Naomi Wolf was interviewed once, and he had this Webster Tarpley guy who's kind of a wacky dude, but a lot of his stuff sounds like Bernie Sanders' platform, even if he was also a conspiracy theorist, this Webster Tarpley guy. And he also didn't believe in global warming and all this shit, which is just really ridiculous. But so I had gotten into Alex Jones. It was kind of a slow crawl towards that. And that was around the time, I believe around that time, Ron Paul was coming to prominence. And this is like 4 years, obviously, after the Kerry Bush election. And I almost voted for him in 2008, but I decided that Obama I would vote for. And it was between Ron Paul and Obama pretty much at that point for me, because I had gotten into some of the libertarian stuff. And how did I get into some of that stuff? Well, I think some of the self-help industry and how it was aligned with some of those types of thoughts, and kind of also in collision with not collision, but in concordance with Alex Jones, some of the stuff I was reading. Just basically, I was coming from the left into libertarian ideas. So I still believed in some of the left-wing ideas. I just thought things could be better handled if it was done. Libertarian would pull us out of all these wars, and make things more independent as far as things done locally, and just stuff like that. I had that idea kind of implemented in my brain at that point. So I kind of was going libertarian. Of course, I still believed that some things could be handled by government if done in an uncorrupt way. So I almost voted for Ron Paul, but at the last minute, I voted for Obama. And by then, I was pretty much sucked into the Alex Jones nexus, even if I voted for Obama, which is kind of crazy to think about. So short time later, the movie The Obama Deception came out, and I was like, yeah, it pretty much tells the truth about Obama. And The Obama Deception, if you watch the original version, it's an Alex Jones movie, for those who don't know. He made some movies, or documentaries, or pseudo-documentary, whatever the fuck you want to call it, or propaganda film, whatever. If you watch the original Obama Deception, it's actually, it could be interpreted from this anti-establishment left-wing position, but it could also be like a right-wing crazy kooky position too. So I know they added some stuff in that was a little bit more so-called, right-wing Republican, but it had a lot of those. I mean, obviously it wasn't didn't believe in global warming. A lot of those people did not, or do not. So that was part of it, but it made some good points about the left-right paradigm and all that stuff, and I understand where they're coming from there. The people in power want to divide people, and all that kind of shit. Of course, I don't know if that's a conscious thing all the time. I think it's more of an enculturated attitude or idea or subconscious belief. So I debated people about Obama in my family and some friends and stuff too, probably, as far as I remember. But at that point, I was believing a lot of the Alex Jones stuff about the New World Order, and we had to fight the New World Order, whatever that means now. The rich people getting together to conspire against everybody. So my honest assessment of Alex Jones at the time was that he was full of shit a lot of the time, but his heart was in the right place. He just was kind of looking at this information in this weird way, and a lot of the stuff was the truth. Even if I had heard the infamous Y2K broadcast by then, which, looking back, I don't know why that didn't send red flags flying in my head. But I guess if you really dig in and listen to Alex Jones hours on end, even if it was somewhat ironically at times too, I'll admit, you will start to believe that shit. Because he does have a charm, he does have a manipulative way of getting to you. So I probably wasn't sold 100% on him, but I believed a lot of his stuff. And there was even this day, I think it was 2010, where it was Buy Silver Day, because you had to, go against the Federal Reserve. And it was kind of this huge thing in conspiracy culture about the Federal Reserve. And now I don't think the Federal Reserve's a great fucking institution or something. Don't get me wrong. I think they should be audited and all that shit. But it's like at the time that was like the biggest, most evil thing. So you had to have this day. Of course, back then, Alex Jones was hawking more of these gold and silver companies rather than his supplements. And even his ex-wife has said that he began to change, or there was an article, I think it was Vox or BuzzFeed or whatever, which are often bullshit propaganda outlets for various reasons, but had a really good article about Alex Jones. Said around that time, when he changed his supplement thing, he started to go more into the mainstream right instead of the gold and silver, because that was more libertarian. And that's when he was more anti-establishment in a certain way. That's just on a side note. So I bought silver, and I was like, yeah, I hope Ron Paul runs again, and I'd vote for Rand Paul, all this shit, And I'd heard about Bernie Sanders as well, by the way, because Bernie Sanders was also included in, like, he wasn't a libertarian. He was, he's a crazy socialist, but he has some good ideas, unlike all those other Democrats. That was kind of the attitude of Alex Jones at the time, was that, and people in the libertarian side at the time, because he went against a lot of the institutions these anti-establishment libertarian conspiracy theorists went against. And of course, that may sound like a bash on Bernie Sanders, but it actually is not. In a certain way, someone could interpret that as something bad. But of course, coming from where I'm coming from, even now, I don't think that's a bad thing that he worked with Rand Paul or whoever about, pulling troops out of the Middle East or whatever. I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't know if he did that exactly, and Dennis Kucinich was another guy like that. And I liked Dennis Kucinich even then. So I was still, I'd say I was still definitely a left-winger, but it just with some spicing the libertarian thing up with it, or vice versa, or whatever. So the 2012 election, well, I'm going to go actually between that. So the Walker protest in 2011 happened, and I was kind of ambivalent about it, because I was like, well, my attitude was the New World Order, or the grand scheme of things, we need to change things from such a high level that this little thing doesn't matter as much as the big thing, the big reforms that we need to make, or whatever. Audit the Fed, or whatever the fuck, I had these ideas. I mean, obviously some of the ideas parallel to my ideas now about taking money out of politics and all that shit. So until that stuff happened, who cares about Scott Walker? It'll just be some other faceless fuck in there, a couple years. So I didn't contribute to the protests, and then I had a girlfriend for a while who gave me shit about being ambivalent about the Scott Walker thing. Of course, ironically, later on, I was pretty happy to see him go, but leave office. So that was just a weird thing that happened at the time. That was when I was fully into the conspiracy culture. Now, 2012 was when I finally drew up the courage to vote for a libertarian candidate, and I did vote for Gary Johnson. And I was proud of my vote because I was like, well, of course, Mitt Romney's a joke, and more of a joke than Obama, but Obama is kind of corrupt and kind of reneged on his promises about a lot of stuff. And he's he had 2 years to do his thing with the Democratic Congress and House, or Senate and House. So he didn't do it because he's not a fucking real liberal Democrat guy. He's a centrist, center right, probably. In fact, because that's what he was. But at the same time, the whole Tea Party thing had kind of simmered out of control. And this is shortly before that. It was probably 2011, where the Occupy Wall Street happened. And I liked that because I thought that was more. I thought the Scott Walker thing was like, oh, just establishment Democrats hate this guy. I hate him too, but it's like, you want more establishment Democrats in there, fuck you. The Occupy thing is like, fuck them all. So I was more into that than the Scott Walker thing, even though they happened sort of similar circumstances some of the time. So that had happened, and I had seen these Tea Party people kind of go a little crazy. And I think that was kind of, because at first it was like Ron Paul was the Tea Party guy, and then they got all these fucking religious fanatics and stuff. And I still liked Alex Jones. This is like late 2009 to 2011, 2012. Even though I voted for Gary Johnson, but he wasn't, he wasn't a Tea Party guy. He was socially liberal. So I had seen all this stuff going on. So I was starting to make a little more ways back to the left, even during that time. So like between maybe 2006 through 2009, I had kind of gone more to the libertarian side, and then I was slowly going back to the left because I had seen some of the craziest shit. These people just see these headlines of these people talking about creationism. They believe, the world was created in 7 days, even if they're confronted with science. And I started to watch a lot of YouTube videos with like these like atheists versus creationists. And I just thought, I'm not an atheist, but I thought they're disproving these people time and time again. So that was part of the thing with the right wingers. They just started pushing all these crazy things. And at that time, Alex Jones was not against Obama for being some kind of demon or fucking whatever. He was against him for saying he was someone he was not, which a lot of the left was saying. So at that point in time, there was some of that conspiracy shit going on, obviously, but it wasn't the same thing as what happened later. So at the thing is with Obama and like the crazy or Alex Jones and the crazy Tea Party people. Alex Jones was like, the Tea Party got corrupted by. He was actually said this several occasions. The Tea Party people got corrupted by the establishment Republicans who want to use it as a platform to get into power and kind of fool people the same way Obama did with the left. That was a really important point to me. So I was like, but at the same time, the crazier Tea Party people were racist even at that point to some extent. And they weren't part of the Ron Paul wing. They were more like this weird combination between some of Ron Paul stuff and some of the mainstream stuff, the mainstream Republican stuff, and then this other weird shit. That's all I can put it as. And a lot of that was conspiracy culture, which I later found out. But at the time, Alex Jones was playing coy. He was not, either he was playing coy or he was not part of that to a huge extent. So, at that point, I had voted for Gary Johnson in 2012. Something happened that, or not one thing. Things started to happen that were just pulling me more and more to the left. And the irony is, the whole social justice warrior things were happening at the same time, and I hated that shit. All this stuff about fucking these crazy, people that want to censor video games or whatever. I don't know. You could say what you will. She didn't want to censor video games. You could say she did, whatever. But there was a lot of just different stuff. People saying outrageous shit like, if you don't want to date a trans person, you're a fucking transphobic person. People just started to say all this shit. There was a whole big red thing, big red, quote unquote, in Toronto, and all these like crazy debates about culture and all this shit. So even when I was going more to the left, I still hated the identity politics shit. So I started to watch a lot of videos on YouTube about, all these left-wing political things. And I was just like, I don't know. Just seems more appealing. So at the same time, Alex Jones was going more to the right in this mainstream way. Case in point, one day he was talking about Ted Cruz, years back. He's like, he's a neocon, fascist, blah, 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 blah. A few years later, he's like, I kind of like Ted Cruz now. It's like, what happened? How did you start liking Ted Cruz? And so that coincided with, his whole thing, which later led to the Trump thing with him, which you could read all sorts of articles about what happened and how it happened. Like I said that, I think it was Vox that did a really good feature on that, how he shifted his opinions and people left the show and stuff. So I think that was when the Sandy Hook thing happened too. And I was just like, this can't be a conspiracy if they're not doing anything about guns right away. I just started to question a lot of the stuff that he started to put out. Everything was I think the last false flag thing I sort of believed were those two shooters in the Boston massacre or whatever. I sort of believed in that because it seemed like they had some intelligence connections. At the same time, Jones started to change his story. It wasn't the CIA anymore. It was actually whatever, when he was against the CIA, when the military-industrial complex, I was totally on board with that because I hated that shit. I hated the establishment. When he started to say it was Democrats or whatever, he's just becoming what he once railed against. So I was by the St. Louis, the shooting of, I think it was Michael Brown. They had these protests, and InfoWars was there. And that was really where I started to shift, because those protests, they were still somewhat reasonable. There were still some somewhat reasonable reporters for InfoWars, and they were saying all this stuff. And then slowly, as that event evolved, that's when I noticed that shit just got really crazy. And then they started to push their own brand of identity politics about, the white male, whatever, against the people that were protesting the cops. And Alex Jones just totally went back on everything he said before. Even if a lot of stuff he said was crazy, he started to just go back on everything. And that's when I left. I left the right. I walked away. Walk away. I walked away from the right. And I could go into all the details, but that's what happened. I walked away from Alex Jones, and I walked away from the crazy shit. And that's sort of what happened. I'm just trying to think of if there's anything more. But I'm sure there is. I mean, that's kind of what happened. And then I noticed these people, just like with Obama, they don't question anything Donald Trump says or does. It's like they're in a cult. They're brainwashed. And it's like us versus them. Everybody that's against Donald Trump and all this shit. It's just like, that shit is just stupid. When Donald Trump does something good, I'll give him credit. Like with the crime bill, with TPP, I'll give him credit, so. And anyways, I'm going to get back to the whole timeline. So 2013, 2014, going more left wing. And something just happened because I think basically I started to read a lot of stuff about Europe because I've always wanted to go there. And I've always wanted to visit, the Scandinavian countries where, a lot of the black metal and power metal bands are from and all this stuff. And, I've just been fascinated by Europe for a long time, just architecture, the history, the languages. So I started to read about their political system or systems they had there. And I realized that, if you look at all the statistics, America is like 35th at everything, pretty much, with regards to industrialized Western countries. So let's say 2009, you would read it, and this kind of goes back to like my evolution out of this kind of libertarian thing, which I still ostensibly identify to a certain extent with the libertarian ideas and ideals, but I don't think it's pragmatic with the way our system and how people are now. Maybe they could evolve into that, but I still like the ideas of libertarianism to a certain extent. The what is it called? The non-use of force or whatever it's called. A lot of that stuff, like, it appeals to me. But 2009, let's say you would read an article by someone who's a libertarian, and they would argue against, say, Medicare for all or national health care. They'd say, well, I don't feel that on a philosophical level it's good to have people pay for this or that. It's forcing people to do this, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's fine. That's on a more esoteric, higher plane of thinking than what they would say today. So they would say, we don't want it to be like Venezuela, even though every other non-Venezuelan country on the earth that actually is in the first world, is the democratic capitalist society, has national health care. Why is that? Because of this propaganda from the right for 60 years against Medicare for all, single payer health care. So I started to read all these arguments, started to read about all these countries and stuff. I'm just like, this is insane. Why is it like this here? You can argue on a philosophical level if you're forcing people to pay for other people. It's the use of force, the libertarian thing about force and about collectivism and all that stuff. I still like The Fountainhead is one of my favorite books by Ayn Rand. I mean, I just like how it's written. It just has this weird thing about it, and I kind of like it. It's just this weird thing. I will admit it, that it's one of my favorite books because about this artist that struggles against this collective, so to speak, that's against him. So, anyways, the arguments became more and more insipid and dumb as time went on with a lot of the people that were against governmental involvement in things. So that pushed me further to the left too, because it's like, if you're going to make an argument and not use facts, statistics to anchor your point, that makes you just an ideologue, a hack, idiot, a fucking retard. Nothing against developmentally disabled people. That was just, slang term for someone that's stupid. I'm sorry. Or has stupid ideas, idiotic ideas. So when I actually started to read these arguments, I just outright laughed, and I just was like, this is just fucking ridiculous. And that's when I really got into, the left-wing Green Party, whatever you want to call it, things, because it's just like, speaking of that, I was once even a global warming skeptic to some extent. Now, I never thought that global warming wasn't real or man-made. I just thought there's certain people that are, and I might believe that someone like Al Gore would exaggerate for, because he's sponsored by someone that is going to do a business to, with carbon taxes or whatever. I'm willing to believe that. As far as the whole thing, I was skeptical that a lot of people were involved in that, and there was this like, I wouldn't call it conspiracy, but it's like this kind of indoctrination that global warming is this big deal that it is. Now, anytime a scientist makes a prediction, it's not going to necessarily go the way that they say it will go. But at the same time, being a global warming skeptic, and then coming back to this scientific analysis of it, when I started reading more stuff and studies, I just was like, at the same, even though maybe even part of me was still skeptical, I was like, what's wrong with renewable energy? Why is that a bad thing? Even if it doesn't exist on the level they say, what's wrong with not wasting shit all the time and fucking consumerism and throwing shit away? It's just my life philosophy. I've used the same cell phone for 5 years. I keep cars for a lot longer maybe sometimes than I should. And I use the same computer for 10 years and shit. So I don't think there's anything wrong with having this idea that things don't have to be disposable. So those arguments, as far as the global warming is a myth from scientists, I mean, like, what do they have to gain from all lying, 97% of them, for this? It didn't make sense to me. So that was another thing that kind of pushed me to the left as well. And the thing that really hit home for me was 2016. Because I'd watch these videos about how corrupt the Democratic Party is and stuff, and I was kind of ambivalent about Bernie Sanders at first, and family members and stuff talked about him, great guy. I used to hear him on Air America, actually, or some of the Air America stuff that was left over on some other radio stations. Like, there was Tom Hartman had a show, and he had Bernie on all the time back in the mid 2010s and stuff. So I used to hear him, and or early 2010s, I should say. So I used to hear him, and I was like, yeah, he seems like a pretty decent guy, So, but, I was just like kind of ambivalent, because I was like, maybe I was still stuck in that, a little bit of that Alex Jones thing. I don't know. It was like, oh, they're all corrupt and, all this stuff. So once the election rolled around, I think it took a few months, but I think Donald Trump, I kind of liked that he was kind of a maverick candidate at first, but then it just got all derailed, because I was like, this guy is a fucking fraud. He's just going along with the crazier people in our country. And I really got into Bernie, and to some extent, I'm never, I'm not a party guy. I'm not a labels guy. So I was into him, and I knew what they were doing to him, these fucking politicians, these political establishment elites or whatever. So that just made me support him more. And once, I started to read the arguments between the establishment and the people that were into Bernie, I was like, back to that Ralph Nader thing all over. Again, it was the same thing. It was like, these fucking bastards, Hillary and the Debbie Wasserman Schultz and all these people, fucking scum of the earth. I mean, just terrible. It was just pathetic. And I know it's all politics, but it's just what they did to those people. It's pathetic. So, of course, with Russiagate and all that, I was skeptical, because it's like, well, they did all that shit to Bernie with the superdelegates and all that stuff. And there's countless articles written about that. So I was like, well, maybe Russiagate didn't happen. But that kind of leaves it to now. So I had a journey where I kind of vacillated a little bit to the right, and I still like a lot of those ideas. as far as the libertarian right goes. And I'm a capitalist. I'd love to be rich. Reading Tony Robbins books or dating books or whatever that I've read, kind of self-improvement, and you live this lavish lifestyle. It kind of sells that. So of course, I still have that in me. But I think it's pathetic that all these countries can have a high standard of living, have all these programs, have better results from it. You look at the statistics, and America doesn't. And it doesn't, it's ridiculous, because it's like, why can't we do that? Why can't we try that? And that kind of goes, into my idea that it's more like I'm anti-establishment, anti-authoritarian to a certain extent. And I also think ideas need to be tried, out-of-the-box ideas in politics and our society. When you have people pushing the status quo and just outright smashing people that have any kind of semblance of a different idea, like the establishment does, it just makes me want to smash the establishment and do something. I mean, I think we should try something different. If we were in a super socialist communist country, let's just say communist, quote unquote, communist as in Russia, Soviet Union back in the day, and China, back in the day, or whatever. I'd probably be like a right-wing libertarian. We need capitalism. But the fact of the matter is we've gone to this weird place where, people aren't living the standard of living that other people from other countries are not. That didn't make sense. The people are not living the standard of living that other from other countries are, and they're happy. Now, you could say it's force that they're using to get these taxes to pay for this stuff, but isn't it better to pay for something like education than bombing some fucking brown people for Halliburton? If we're gonna go one way or the other, let's go the other way. But people don't want to fucking hear that. They want to be brainwashed into thinking, like a certain family member of mine that thinks I'm influenced by Russian propaganda because I was against Hillary. It's like, what the fuck is wrong with you? A person, by the way, who I've been told by numerous friends of family and family members they would not have been, this is a quote, they would have not been surprised if he would become an anarchist in the 70s. So that kind of sums it all up. I have had quite a journey to this point, and I will continue to bash the establishment to a certain extent. I'm going to vote for one of the more, they're all part of the establishment. Everybody is involved with all this shit as establishment, unless you're talking about some really fringe party. Let's just be honest. But as far as less establishment, less normal status quo, less corrupt, I will vote for one of the Democratic candidates if they become the nominee. If one of them do not, I'll be voting third party. And I think by now we know who those people are that I probably would vote for. And what do I think will happen? I don't know. Donald Trump got elected against all impossible odds. Everybody against him. Just be honest. People did not want Donald Trump. As far as the establishment did not want Donald Trump. So who I will vote for, if it's another fucking neoliberal jerk fest, as they say. Neoliberal, you can look it up. It doesn't mean liberal. It means neoliberal economics. But I do believe in trade over war. But anyways, trade and diplomacy over war with countries. But anyways, that doesn't make me a neoliberal per se. I'll be voting for someone like that. And no, or I won't be voting for someone like that. As far as like a Hillary or a Biden, fucking idiot, or a dude from Indiana, can't pronounce, or Buttigieg. I won't vote for him. I won't vote for fucking Booker, Harris, Castro. But you know, if Tulsi Gabbard became the nominee, I'd vote. Yeah, Bernie Sanders, even Elizabeth Warren, who's kind of leans more establishment. It's probably establishment plus, you know. But if it's not one of those people, I'm not voting for the fucking nominee. I'm gonna vote third party again because that's what I do when I don't like the nominee. Either nominees, of course, Trump will be the nominee of the probably be the nominee of the Republicans, but and there's no way in hell I'd vote for him. The irony is, I probably would have voted for him in 2000, considering the platform he had back then was really way more progressive than you would expect. It's almost on a Sanders level, even Bernie Sanders, that is. If you read it back in the day, well, it's populist with some right wing tendencies and a lot of kind of liberal tendencies, drug decriminalization. But anyways, enough about him. It was Jesse Ventura running. I would fucking just vote for him. Period. I mean, even I don't know if about against Bernie Sanders, but I mean, I'd probably vote for Jesse Ventura about against almost anybody because he's my favorite politician living. And that's all I got to say. Please subscribe. Send me hate mail. No, don't send me any mail. Send me hate messages. Downvote this video and say MAGA 2020 or stupid memes and don't make a substantial political argument. Just fucking send me memes and say a bunch of bullshit on my page because that's what you do. And I'll see you later.